Is our reality a simulation? An actual matrix? Can we finally prove there's life after death? And what about this alien UFO thing, really? There's a lot of cool, smart people working on this stuff, and I'm talking to them. Let's take the time to really explore bigger questions. There's a lot of people exploring the UFO alien question and the possibility of a government cover-up and intervention. One of the people who's got his head screwed on straight and has done more actual tangible work than anyone in the field is Richard Dolan. We sat down and had this conversation that started with the history of the UFO cover-up and went all the way into the spiritual implications of some alien influence. Hi, I'm Ron James, and I'm here with one of the premier personalities in ufology today, Richard Dolan. Now, Richard is one of the ex-hosts of the TV show Sci-Fi Investigates, and he's also the author of the series of books, UFOs in the National Security State. Richard is well known by everyone in the genre, and Richard, I understand you've got more material on the way.
I do. Yes, I do, Ron. I'm working not only on the third volume of my history, which will be a study of the UFO phenomenon and cover-up from 1992 to the present day, and that'll be out a couple of years from now. But in advance of that, I'm actually co-authoring a book right now with the gentleman who created the TV show a number of years ago called Dark Skies. I'm sure a number of people remember that. It was a great show. The book and his name is Bryce Zabel, and we're working on a book called AD, After Disclosure. And I think our subtitle is going to be Life After Contact. And really, for the last several years, I've been trying to work through my own thoughts on what the world might look like once the truth is out on the topic of UFOs.
Sure.
And how might that change our world? I've gone through my whole life training as a historian, looking at the past, so this is an exercise for me to try to look at the future, or at least to see how things might work out. I often will describe myself as an idealist, but not as a utopian, and I don't want to go into utopian scenarios about how things will be after disclosure.
Do you think utopian scenarios are just generally unrealistic, or that they're dangerous to strive for?
That's a good question. Well, look, I see nothing wrong with trying to create the best society that we can. I just, to believe that we're going to create some perfect world in which there are no more problems and everything's going to be great, I'm a little bit skeptical of that. So what I'm trying to do in this book with Bryce is to really look with a critical eye, not necessarily a negative eye, but to look with some detachment on how our world might change, and it's going to change, I think, in dramatic ways, once this information becomes common knowledge.
Now, do you think, obviously the governments are set against disclosures. People like Stephen Bassett and Danny Sheehan have been working for years from different angles to try and get some kind of official declaration, and it doesn't seem that this current administration is going to be any different than previous ones.
I agree.
And my question is, do you think that the evidence is finally going to become so overwhelming that the government just doesn't even bother to deny it anymore, or that they continue to deny it, or that they quit denying it, or that they finally admit it?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. What is happening is that we're in the year 2010 now, and this isn't 2000, this isn't 1990, it's certainly not 1950. We're in a different world. We're in the process of continually reinventing ourselves technologically and really socially. I am convinced now, there's no motivation, I think, for these governments to give up this secret. In fact, I don't really think that the various governments of the world, the official governments, really have the sufficient access to the secret. I've been arguing for years that it seems to have gone in private in a certain way, that the behind-the-scenes structures of our global system are really where it's at, that the formal political system, the governments are a little more than window dressing.
Now, would that make books like Corso's work, The Day After Roswell, would that make that relevant, that whole scenario? Do you think that that's actually
Yeah,
very
I
close
think
to
that
what
that
happened?
scenario is a logical one. In other words, the idea that, let's rewind the clock a little bit here, go back to the 1940s and 50s, and let's assume that we recovered a piece of alien hardware. If you're going to study this and do something with it, well, it's going to have to end up with private industry at some point. They are the people, the contractors, who have the ability to study and hopefully replicate some of this exotic technology. In particular, it makes sense because, look, I mean, since the Civil War of the United States, we've had a government that's been dominated without cessation by the leaders of industry and finance. That's just how the U.S. is. That's how all the governments of the world are today. So you've got that, and plus, when these military people retire, they end up going into those defense industries anyway. So it makes perfect sense that the technology and the secrets go private.
And that frees people up from Freedom of Information Act. And
yes, it frees them from that. It takes the secret from being classified to something that's more proprietary.
Sure.
And I believe that this is what's happened. So that the president, for example, President Obama, I doubt has the ability to even influence policy on this. I truthfully don't believe that he does. And I think that that ability has been taken away from the U.S. presidents for some time. I don't think that George W. Bush had the authority, and I doubt that Bill Clinton did.
George Bush Sr. was probably a lot more plugged in with his CIA.
Well, I think he was. Most people looking at George H.W. Bush think that he was very much involved, and I think that's probably true. Although we don't really know for sure about a lot of this, but I think from the various leaks that have come out, I've spoken to a couple of people myself, and I think that's probably the case. But the thing is, dealing with the disclosure by a current administration, say the Obama administration, I was never of the opinion that it was going to happen. Steve Bassett's my friend, and I look at him as a colleague. I've worked with him for many years, but we've always seemed to disagree on the imminence of disclosure within any presidential administration.
Capital D, where there's an official declaration in a press conference from the White House.
I don't think that they're just motivated to do it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. I think it's going to happen as an emergency and almost by accident. What I think is going to be the case is that despite the fact that there's incredible amount of good videos that are being taken, they haven't made the breakthrough to an admission yet. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. I think it will. Think about the prevalence of video camcorders on phones now. Mm-hmm. It's almost becoming universal. I am waiting for a moment when some television news announcer is out there and something flies by and that they just can't deny it. I think it's going to happen. I don't know when. I don't know what the exact trigger will be, but I do know that in our world today, there are going to be more and more opportunities for this secret to come out. We're in such a tumultuous time that it will happen. And when it does, there's going to be this immediate need for the powers that be to control the process of disclosure, to control the spin. This is something that I think we really need to look at very hard. I'm not seeing a lot of discussion on this among UFO researchers or among people who are into exopolitics or disclosure. And I think we really need to recognize that when D-Day comes, Disclosure Day comes, there's going to be a tremendous amount of need for the political and the intelligence community to control the process. And it makes sense. Look, if you were the president and you had to tell the world about this, you're going to want to do it in a very careful way, in a way that's not going to hopefully destabilize the political and financial systems of the globe. That means you're going to want to control spin. That might mean you'll want to massage the truth. In other words, lie a little bit to keep people in a calm state. And I feel that it's going to be an obligation on those of us who really know this topic to keep the process honest and open. And if that causes things to be unstable, well, look, you can live in a world where we get truth, or you can live in a world where the powers that be control that truth and lie to us. We're at a crossroads in our society right now. We're at a point where our infrastructure is stretched to the max.
Absolutely.
Petroleum, how much longer are we going to have a world based on burning fossil fuels?
Well, you know, the strategy all along between the big companies that are controlling fossil fuels and petroleum now is, I personally believe that there's all kinds of alternative energy sources that they already know about. And that what they're doing is they're waiting until A, the petroleum has wringed every last drop, and B, they can control the distribution of energy through new sources. So in other words, BP will always be a company that controls this energy. So as soon as they get those infrastructures in place, and they've already begun to do it with solar, all of a sudden you're going to see the revelation of these technologies, because the same people that have been controlling energy up until now are going to be in a position to continue to control energy. So the doorway is opening for these hidden technologies to be revealed, but only in a way that fits the master plan and continues the same kind of economic situation we've been in.
Yeah, well, this is in line. I think I like what you're saying here. Not that I like it, but I think that what you're saying is very logical. The only thing that I'm wondering is whether there is a clearly thought out in transitioning us. Because that's almost a benign situation. You know, get all their profit out of petroleum and then move us all collectively into a better energy situation, yes, where they continue to make profit. I see that as very possible, yeah. And the question is, are we going to be able to make that transition, or are we not really going to make that transition?
With or without a major calamity.
Right. There's just so many things that can go wrong right now. It seems to me that we need to exploit the technology that is behind the UFO phenomenon. First and foremost, energy. So we need to find a way of burning clean energy. Mm-hmm. But of course, you know, the problem is going to be doing it in a way that's still going to be safe. I mean, think of it this way. Whatever it is that allows these craft to do the things that they do, whether it's the 0-point energy field maybe, or something else that's very exotic and very useful, it might also be used for very destructive purposes. After all, for example, look at these plasma balls that sometimes people see. Mm-hmm. This is an intense amount of energy in a very confined space, so there's some kind of mechanism that's keeping all of this energy together. We'd like to know what that is. Once we find out what that is, not only can you have a great source of energy, but you might have a really great bomb or great destructive power.
Now, there are those who say that the biggest reason for lack of disclosure is that the technology is so fearsome that humanity's better off not knowing about it.
Well, I have suggested this myself at times. I've often wondered that if there's not a clear way of controlling this, it could be scary. Look, none of us would want some crazy person to have access to technology that allows them to blow up the Pacific Ocean. And what if that is the case? So no one wants to promote a kind of totalitarian global system, but we also don't want to blow up our planet. We've got to find a way to, and this is something that I've been trying to promote for some time now, that if I were to have 10 minutes with the president, you know, my fantasy of getting my 2 cents into President Barack Obama, what would I have him do? I would want him to promote a policy that would enable us to have a peaceful transition to this new reality. One of the things that he would have to do is we'd have to find a way to safely promote this clean energy in a way that actually doesn't promote a financial collapse. Because look, no one has any love for the petroleum industry.
Right.
Nobody has any love for the banking industry. But nobody really, I hope, wants a true global collapse of this system. Because if the global system collapses, we're all going to suffer. It's going to be bad for all of us. And maybe in the long term, it'll be great, but in the short term, and that could be as long as 20 years for all we know, it could be a very, very dangerous time. So I think what we really need in this hour of our civilization is responsible, strong, visionary leadership that can help bring about a peaceful and rational transition to a better
this
system.
transition that absolutely has to happen, there's so many elements that plug into it to create the whole. You have the whole awareness of alien technology and alien presence and our place in the universe, but then you also have a spiritual and conscious development of humanity as a whole, a collective and individual development that a lot of people think is happening on the planet right now. And you also have the fact that as governments and the very nature of capitalism has got to redefine itself into a more compassionate, more intellectual, and more enlightened way of doing things. And there's so many people that are proponents of this in all different facets. And it seems as though we're headed towards a real choice point. Authors like Greg Braden actually call it the choice point, where the sum of our collective consciousness is going to decide our fate. And there's so many different things coming from so many different angles to create the positive and negative outcome. And it's so interesting. It's like the roller coaster is careening and it's going to go one way or the other. But there's so many elements coming together. The alien stuff is part of it. The interdimensional understanding is part of it. The quantum nature of paranormal activity is part of it. And the evolved consciousness of humanity is part of it.
Okay, well, let me just jump in here and speak to two things that come to mind immediately. One, let's call it the spiritual consciousness component of it. I agree, this is very important. If for no other reason that if we're going to have a reality in which these other beings are here, we as a species, as a society, need to get our game up a little bit here. Most people spend their as far as expanded consciousness, I'm not really sure I'm agreeing. Most people spend their lives sitting in front of the TV, watching YouTube, playing video games, zoning out. There are people who are, yes, working on themselves and their awareness, but there's a lot of people who, if they're not just working 40, 50, 60-hour weeks, they don't have time for this stuff, they're sitting in front of the tube. Okay.
People are learning how to manifest, how our ability to create reality.
Okay, no, I'm not going to argue that there's a growing and a significant portion of people who are doing this, but there's still the other part. And then the other, but we all are going to want to raise our consciousness. What does that actually mean? Well, and to me, as someone who's very, very attuned to Zen, this is what I actually try to follow philosophically in my own life. It means awareness of where we are right now, an awareness of our place at all times in the cosmos. It means also not spinning out into the past or the future as well. It means really focusing on each moment as really the miracle that each moment is. That's heightened awareness, and that takes a lot of work. That's not just something that's going to come. It takes effort, but we can do it. And I think we'll be energized to do that with the revelation that there are these other beings that are here, because if we're going to deal with them in any kind of responsible or any way at all, we're going to need to get our consciousness up there. Now that's one aspect. The other part, though, creating this new system, I confess, I try to think about this. How do we create a new system? To me, as I see it, it's a way of how do you bypass the world of corporations? To me, that's the bottom line.
Or really change the corporate politics.
Well,
it's a different
here's how I look at it. Look, there are a lot of enlightened people who are trying to run corporations. But the problem is that a corporation has its own inexorable logic. It has its own iron law. And that iron law is you must increase profitability for the shareholders. You could be Mahatma Gandhi, but if you're running General Electric, guess what? If you're not increasing shareholder, you, Mahatma Gandhi, are gone. Doesn't matter how good you are. The corporations are bound to follow certain guidelines. And so, and the problem is that corporate organization is an extremely logical way for people to do economic activity. And the reason for that is that, you know, private money can only take you so far. And corporate money, when you have all these investors, that's going to give you the capital you need to do big projects. But when you get to that, now you're at the point where the corporation develops its own life, as it were. So how, to me, I look at that.
It's not so much the goal of the corporation, it's what the corporation as a structure and as the people that run it are willing to do to achieve that goal. There's nothing wrong with the goal of achieving profitability for the stockholders. What's wrong is what they will do to make that happen. When a corporation begins to embrace greed, dishonesty, and disregard for the fellow human being in order to achieve that goal, that's where the whole model goes wrong.
Well, I search for examples in human history where economic activity was not that way, and I just fail to find any.
Well, it's part of becoming an enlightened civilization.
So, right, the question is, can we do that? And that's a very, you know, that's asking a lot. Can we do it?
Don't you think we have to? Don't you think that that is part of achieving our true human potential and really becoming part of this galactic community?
Well, that's assuming that the galactic community is all filled with nice people. What if it isn't?
Well, I imagine that there's both sides of the coin.
I think that there are. I think that there are, just simply based on what I would consider to be valid evidence from people who've had encounters with other beings. I have 2 kids. I wouldn't want to leave them alone in a room with some of these creatures, I think. I would probably with some of the other beings. I think what we're dealing with is a lot of intelligences that are converging here. I think they're watching us. I think they're very interested in us right now. But I'm not sure that all of them have our best interests at heart. Why should they? I mean, really. I think it's a fallacy, for example, that we will sometimes think that simply because they are at a much more advanced stage, that they have therefore solved a lot of the social and political problems that we are facing.
That's a very common assumption, and it's interesting.
But I think it's a totally wrong assumption.
Yeah.
If we were to go back 1,000 years to some medieval village and show them our new cell phones that can, you know, have an entire library right on there, or show them a laptop computer, they would look at us as like, they would say, wow, you guys are really advanced. You must have solved all of your social and political and economic problems to achieve this level of paradise. And of course we haven't, because the fact is that advanced technology is no proof of advanced spirituality. I just think it's a fallacy to assume that because these other beings have attained some technological level that they're therefore more spiritually or even more mature than we are, that they've solved all of their social and political problems. And one hears this all the time in the UFO field.
You think about Michio Kaku and his levels of civilization, you're saying that that's probably not necessarily the case. Because he says that as civilizations evolve, there comes with it a certain sensibility that would keep them from warring with each other, keep them from using other civilizations and exploiting other civilizations, and actually evolve their way out of the kind of mindset that we're a victim of here on this planet.
I mean,
but what you're saying is that's not necessarily true.
I think maybe it's true at some ultra godlike advanced level.
Sure.
Is it true at our level? Is it true at 1 or 2 levels above where we may happen to be? I'm not so sure. I think that where we're at right now and where these other intelligences may be at, who we call UFOs, I'm not convinced that they're at that level. In fact, what I would say is it seems to me that they're interested in using us as resources in some way. They seem, in many cases, to be interested in using the resources of this earth, including water. So I'm not sure that they're past the exploitative stage of development either. We may get to that point if we're all like, discarnate entities, or where we don't need our bodies, maybe. Right now, we need our bodies. We need to eat. And as a result, there is a need to consume resources. These other entities, if you really go through the many accounts that people have offered of experiences with these other beings, You know as well as I do, many of these experiences seem to be very negative. I'm not trying to be a fearmonger here, but we've got to be realistic. They're not all blonde-haired, blue-eyed beings of light that are going to be mentors to us. Some of them seem pretty nasty.
So here on Earth we have a duality. We have a good and evil. We have him and her, yin and yang. And is it possible that that just carries on through the universe, and that are these beings
Well, think of it,
offset by other beings of darker energies?
Look at life on planet Earth, all right? It's only human beings who are the most cerebrally evolved creatures on the planet, even more than dolphins in terms of brain-to-body mass. It's us. And look at the range of possibilities that a human being can be, from absolute saint-like, saint-like and just beautiful human beings, to sadistic, horrible, dark people. And we've got them all. It's only humanity that has that range. When you look at simpler, lower, levels of life form, let's say intellectually, you don't get that range. They're kind of much more consistent.
I'm sure you don't find senseless killing in nature.
So it very well could be, right, that the higher up you go in the levels of consciousness, the less stable you might actually be, and the more possibility there is for variations in what we would call good and evil, and just a thought. Now, what I would really hate would be for some super powerful entity that's really evil, but hey, you've got traditional societies talking about the devil. What's that? Is there such a thing? Is there true evil on a spiritual level that's even beyond us? Well, again, I don't want to say I know, but I don't really see that it's logical to assume that simply because a species has gotten better gadgets to play with than we do, that they're somehow more spiritually evolved.
When we start talking about the existence of good and evil, then we start looking at some ancient and modern perceptions of that say that good and evil is an illusion that's part of this physical universe. That duality is actually an illusion that we live through to find our way back to the one. There's a lot of different kinds of philosophies that say that kind of thing.
Right.
And then we get into, what is this reality anyway? Are we really in a physical universe, or are we in a hologram? Are we in a matrix? Are we in a cosmic quantum computer? And then when you start to think about that, and you start thinking about the whole quantum nature of right and wrong, yes and no, quantum computing, you were mentioning that, it is actually a way of using different dimensions, photons in different dimensions, to represent 1 and 0 at the same time. And once that happens, the power of computing becomes infinite. And so if these other dimensions are existing, then right and wrong can both be right, yes and no can both be yes and no at the
Here's
same
my
time.
one problem with that. All right. We can say, sure, good and evil are just, when you take the grand view, they don't seem like what they are. But tell that to someone whose family went through the Holocaust, or someone who's experienced torture in some prison, or someone who's is that evil? I would say that yes, it's evil. Okay, yes, there is evil. Now, I mean, I know as well as you do that we all have our perceptions, and good and evil are, creations by the human consciousness to describe certain things, right? But I am personally, at this stage of my consciousness, I can be aware that there's a higher level here, but I can tell you right now, I'm not going to give up the idea that there are evil things here. And I don't think that that's a retrograde attitude either.
Oh, no.
There are some bad things going on. And I just think that in the world of here and now, when we're talking about things like disclosure, we have to be aware that there may be entities that are not going to be looking out for us, and that in fact may be looking upon us as their investment or as their property. That doesn't mean that you have to mistreat your property. A farmer who's got a herd of cattle is not going to want to mistreat his cattle until it's time to eat them, maybe.
Well, there's hundreds of ideas. There's the idea that the whole planet is being raised so that there can be one giant harvest, and that fear is the crop. If you listen to David Icke and the reptilian agenda and a lot of these kind of things, you hear a whole
Sure.
belief system about that. So certainly there could be so many different things happening. And
Right.
whether or not good and evil exist on a broader plane,
Right.
they certainly do exist here. What
Yeah.
purpose they serve, we don't know.
My suspicion is that humanity right now, is of such intense interest to a range of these other beings, entities. And the reason I think that is that I just look at ourselves in our recent history. It's only been 100 years that we've gone from, we've electrified ourselves as a society. We've gotten the car, we've gotten aircraft, missiles, computers, and everything else now that is our world. It's only been about 100 years. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. We've been around for thousands and thousands of years, and now suddenly, bam, we've got all of this stuff. And we've just talked about quantum computing, advanced artificial intelligence, nanotech. These are things that are just extraordinary. And we are on the verge now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we're going to have a world that, by our standards today, is going to seem utterly magical, I think. So if there are any of these other intelligences watching us, I can only assume that they are looking at us and saying, those humans are about to leap into our world. They're going to bump right into us. It doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to be at their level, but it might mean that we have getting close. All right? Because I don't think that progress is just this linear thing. I really believe it leapfrogs and it goes exponentially, and I think we're about to hit that. To give you one example, if we continue our developments in biotechnology, it's going to be very possible, maybe likely, that a human-machine interface is going to be increasingly normal. If you get little nanobots enhancing your brain, jumping your IQ up to 200 or 300.
They've already coined a phrase, Homo cyberneticus, to describe the new integrated human with technology.
So, right. So let's say we get there. We will literally not be the same species that we are now. We're going to be different order of magnitude. And so with that in mind, we really literally have no idea about how far we can advance in this. So I think that these other beings, they must see this. And with that in mind, I think that we are of intense interest to them right now.
Now, what do you think of all the people, and there's a lot of them, that are writing books and claiming to channel extraterrestrial entities and finding very interesting commonalities among the information that's coming out? What's your take on that?
I think that it's entirely true that some people can do this. I used to really not have an opinion on it, but the thing that turned me around was a number of years ago when I really did my own study of remote viewing. The reason I got interested in that, this is, I don't know, 2002, 2003, is because it occurred to me. I learned that so many of these famous remote viewers who had done work for, through the CIA and so forth.
Russell Targ, for instance.
Absolutely, and Ingo Swann and Joe McMoneagle, that these people were bumping into or claiming to bump into ET intelligences. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting when you got people like McMoneagle and Ingo Swann and Lynn Buchanan and others who've had such verifiable success in seeing things across space and across time. All right? And now they're seeing extraterrestrials, or claiming to. Yes, I'm interested in that. And so what I ended up doing is spending some time, and I interviewed a lot of these leading remote viewers and the scientists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and many others. I tried to figure out what is it that allows us to see across space and time, and what does that say about the structure of our reality? What does it say about space and time? What does it say about us, that we can do this? My conclusion is that any individual, I think actually all of us, every person on this planet has the ability to do this. And to see something that happened 20 years ago, or that hasn't happened yet, or to see something on the other side of the world means that there's a part of you that goes out of our space-time reality. It's almost, figuratively speaking, like you're stepping one foot out of it, okay? And you're able to access another point in our space-time reality. Well, what part of you is that? Well, you know, ancient people had a word for it. They called it the soul. It's as good a word as any. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, a physicist might call it a non-local part of you. I guess this is a complicated way for me to say that after I really looked into remote viewing personally, I became convinced that there's an element of us that can leave our bodies, so to speak, and that when this body of yours dies and when my body dies, there's a part of us that's going somewhere. I really believe this. And so that when people channel, or when they claim to channel, I think some of these people are legitimately contacting intelligences that are able to communicate with them that way. So yeah, I totally believe that this happens. The problem with channeling, as with any information that's not falsifiable, as a philosopher would say, you know, it's hard to prove. It's hard to prove to the rational mind, and I think we need to hang on to that. We have to hang on to our rational minds. So I guess I'm at the point with channel information is where I'm always willing to look at it, and I'm never willing simply to grant it legitimacy until I really think long and hard about it.
I was completely unconvinced about channeling until I had the opportunity to work with Pepper Lewis and Lee Carroll and some of these other people that are very, very strong channelers,
right,
and witness what they did.
Right.
And at that point, I did become convinced that there's something happening that is a connection with something else. But then it also plays into the idea that we only have an illusion of separation, that we're really energetically part of the same hologram. And so when we see through time, or we remote view, or we channel, all we're really doing is tapping into something that's already a part of us, that's already a part of everything. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that again plays into the whole energetic solidarity of existence. So
I agree with it. I think it's really well stated too. I think if we're moving in this direction, that these other beings are aware of this as well, of course. Yeah. I think it's very likely. So that there's let's call it a spiritual component to the UFO reality, which we've been kind of talking about here.
And
I think that's definitely
component too.
Yeah, well, maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really, when you really get into it, the whole truth of the presence of these other beings, as revealed through a disclosure process, is, I guess, the most transformative reality that we can imagine. It's something that will certainly shake the political structures, the economic, financial structures of the world, but I think does offer real hope for a spiritual awakening of humanity. However, we have to just, again, remind ourselves that, you know, every garden has its serpent, okay? We have to keep our thinking caps on and remember that there may be entities out there that are, we got to watch out for. And again, I don't mean to sound like an alarmist, but I just can't escape from the evidence of many encounter experiences that they're not all positive. So I think that we're dealing with very possibly a kind of silent Cold War, a secret Cold War. Is that possible at that level of? Are there battles going on among these? Well, the fact is that a number of researchers who have developed their own contacts in the world of intelligence, and I would include myself as one of them, have gotten this information. Mm-hmm. That there's some heavy-duty stuff going on in the covert world. That there are, in fact, a lot of entities, and they are entities we got to watch out for. So, you know, the so-called reptilians that Ike speaks about all the time, do they exist? Well, I think that there are reptoid types of creatures. There's certainly been enough of them as described by experiencers to at least make one consider that they're there. And if they are as described, they are formidable, very formidable. And we need to be aware of that. Are there the other entities that are the tall Nordic types that are continually described, or at least generally described in a much more positive light? seems to be the case. The problem that I often see with a disclosure is going to be, will the president or the leader of the UN General Assembly or whatever be able to produce an alien entity for the world to see? And if he can't do that, then
it's disclosure without proof.
Yeah, right. Good way to put it. Disclosure without proof. And it may be difficult.
We have that now, really.
Well, how do you mean?
Well, if you wanted to assemble all of the evidence and say, put it in front of a mock court of law, so to speak, and lay it out to a jury, the jury would probably conclude that yes, there is an extraterrestrial or interdimensional presence.
Right.
So by our own standards of proof, disclosure has already happened. It just hasn't been officially done. So we already have, in a way, disclosure without proof.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, I subtitled my second volume of history, The Cover-Up Exposed. Why? Because it was during that period under review that the cover-up, I think, really was exposed, that it was proven to exist. That's different, though, from ripping it off and making an open acknowledgement of it. So, yes, I think I agree with you. But regarding the disclosure process, it could be difficult if the president is unable to show the world that what these alien beings look like. If, for example, disclosure happens because of some kind of Independence Day type scenario, or something out of V, God forbid, right?
Sure.
In this TV series, but without us seeing a face of these entities, if we just see the ships. And if they choose not to show themselves to us, or if they show themselves and then disappear, it could complicate things. It could be very messy.
When we think about how complicated things can get, I think that this conversation between us has revealed that it's not so much that disclosure will be like, oh yeah, there's aliens. That would be easy. It's what the length and width and breadth of what disclosure and the impact that it will have on the whole of humanity and the whole of our very existence and the whole way we perceive ourselves as entities in a universe.
Absolutely.
It's not what disclosure will tell so much, it's what disclosure might reveal.
Absolutely. There are several levels that you can go down. There are going to be several uncomfortable questions that are going to be raised as a result of this. One, as I often have pointed out, is it will be inevitable once a disclosure that there's these intelligences here. It will be clear from a review of the literature of the UFO phenomenon that our jets have been chasing these things. Mm-hmm. Not just our jets, Soviet, Chinese, other nations of the world have sent jet interceptors up to go after these things, and they failed every time that we know of. So one question that will be raised is, why is there a confrontational relationship with them? That may not be fun to answer. Question number two is going to be people asking on a very mundane level, how the hell did you keep this secret all these years? What did you do to our society to hide this from us for an entire lifetime? How have you subverted our institutions?
So the repercussions.
Nasty political firestorm will be as a result. Then the third series of questions is, what have you been doing with all these secret programs? Have you actually been building our secret flying saucers? Do you have a secret space program? Well, to me, it looks like the answer to those are both yes. And that's going to be a difficult thing to deal with. Another level, as I have been now arguing for a little while, is that I think what has happened in our civilization is that an element of the clandestine world has broken away. I call it a breakaway civilization. Think of it this way. What would you do if you had exotic technology to study, a near infinite amount of money to play with, and decades, generations of total secrecy within which to study it? Would you and your scientist team have the ability to make some breakthroughs in their scientific thinking? I think probably yes. And then would they want to share all of those breakthroughs with the rest of the world? Maybe not. Not if those breakthroughs involve anti-gravity technology, the ability to go off-world, to do certain things. And so what I think has happened in the clandestine world is that they have gone to a level of technology so far beyond what we are at right now, and with a different cosmology also. It's a cosmology in which they're dealing with the extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial reality on a daily basis, maybe. So we can fairly call them a separate civilization, a breakaway civilization, as I'm saying. I think
Now, do you think ultimately they're still on our side?
Good question. What do I really think? I think they're on their side, to be honest with you, and they just want us to kind of stay quiet and do our jobs. But so I think this will be another of the fourth issue that will arise, that it will inevitably come out that part of humanity has kind of left the rest of us in the dust. Then we're going to have to start asking questions about these other beings. Who are they? What's their agenda? Why are they interested in us?